Jeff, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being a guest today. Now, we always start off the show with what are you doing to nourish yourself right now?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you both. I have a couple things that I do to nourish myself. One is that my passion is actually fly fishing for trout in rivers. And and can you imagine you're standing right in a cold flowing river with clear water and the environment around you. It may be a forest, it may be open country, and you're just kind of throwing that line around and you're going, okay, maybe I'll catch a fish, maybe not, but look where I am. I'm in this beautiful location. Water and forest for me is very, very nourishing. And I actually live in an old growth forest. I have trees right here all around me that it would take 4 or 5 people holding arms to get around the bottom of it. So those are two things that really nourish me.
Yeah, that's amazing. Casey and I are both big nature girls, so we can definitely understand how that would be your happy place for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. Well, so we are so excited to chat with you today, Jeff, all about mushrooms. Casey and I are nutritional therapy practitioners. So obviously mushrooms for us, it's, food is medicine, as Hippocrates says. So I'm really excited to talk to you more about like the medicinal purposes of medicine way beyond, B vitamins and vitamin D and all that kind of fun stuff,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we're excited to dissect your brain that way. But first, just begin with telling us a little bit about how you got into this industry. I mean, we heard that it kind of started off, I think, as like farming, so more of like the food aspect, and then you got into the medicine. So talk to us about your history.
Well, you know what? I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in Seattle, and it is a very wet climate. So it's probably one of the best mushroom places in the world. So I grew up with mushrooms all around me, and went out with parents of friends who were mushroomers. My parents were not, and just sort of getting out into the woods, finding mushrooms. That was very interesting to me, kind of like a treasure hunt. And then I went to university in Seattle, and my field of study was actually anthropology because I was just fascinated by different cultures, and I just loved, okay, people are doing things differently. And of course, we're talking about the 60s, and we were looking at a lot of things differently from the mainstream culture. So I was studying anthropology, but I also studied mycology while I was at the university. We had a very famous mycologist there that I studied under. And that between the two of them, I kind of put them together, and my field of study was actually ethno-mycology, which was the use of mushrooms as food, the use of mushrooms as medicine, and the use of mushrooms in shamanic purposes, for shamanic purposes. And so that was my main interest while I was at university. But when I got out of university, I had to find a job. And I thought, well, I'd really love to learn how to grow mushrooms. And so I went 60 miles down the road to Olympia, Washington, where the only mushroom farm in Washington state was, and applied for a job. Little did I know that getting a job at a mushroom farm was the easiest thing in the world because mushroom farms, they grow mushrooms, the agaricus mushroom, which they grow, the button mushroom that you see in the marketplaces, they grow it on compost. A lot of people think, oh yeah, you hear the old joke, oh yeah, I'm like a mushroom, they keep me in the dark and feed me, bullshit, right? Well, it actually grows on a compost that's primarily straw. But they have a lot of different things that they put in the straw, not necessarily manures, but sometimes horse manure, but when you're composting, and look, we were composting 320 tons of material every week. So it didn't smell very well. So anyway, a lot of people didn't want to be around that, and certainly not work there. I did. I got a job. I was there for the next 10 years. I loved every minute of it.
That's super cool. Well, I can imagine that. I mean, you brought up growing on straw and manure. I would imagine that that's way more, I guess, environmentally more natural than like grain, right? So I've heard that sometimes they have been growing mushrooms on grain.
Yeah, well,
So,
yeah. And here's the thing about that is that think about mushrooms, and just I'll just sort of explain a little bit about it. As this organism that we call a mushroom is just one stage of this organism. So what you have is you have spores, and these spores, when they're out in nature, they will germinate into the wood or the ground that they fall onto. They'll germinate and they'll create a very fine filament called a hypha. When these hypha come together, they form a network. And this network, and if you were to see this network, it look like mold, white mold growing out or something, but they form this network, and the network's called mycelium. When conditions are right, this mycelium, which is growing, and that's what is decomposing all of the material that's out there in our natural world. Without fungi and bacteria and these other organisms, we would have all of this woody tissue and leaves and you name it that doesn't break down to as part of this whole cycle to create humus for other plants to grow. So you've got the mycelium amassing nutrients, breaking down all of this different wood fiber and the rest. And when the time is right, which is in the fall here in the Northwest, temperature goes down, it starts to rain, humidity goes up comes a mushroom. The mushroom comes up, and for about 2 weeks it grows, it matures, and that's when it grows up to be kind of like an umbrella. And under the underside of that are gills, and they produce spores. And then those spores drop, and we've sort of completed this cycle. So think about it as this organism has these different stages: spore, mycelium, and mushroom. Now, how do we grow mushrooms, right? It's like they have spores, they don't have seeds. We can't just go, oh, wow, here's a seed, I'm going to plant it. Doesn't work that way at all. So the way we actually grow mushrooms is we will take spores, or even we'll take a piece of live tissue from the mushroom, and we can grow it out in a petri plate, and we can have live mycelium. And to make seed for growing mushrooms, we'll take that live mycelium, we'll put it on a carrier material, like even grain. And then once it grows out of that grain, well, think a gallon jar of grain has thousands of grains in it. We will break that up, mix it into our compost, all those different grains, and each grain becomes like a seed. And the mycelium grows off of that. It grows through the materials that we're growing the mushroom on, which is the food. So rather than grow mushrooms, some companies actually will take that myceliated grain that normally we use as seed. Instead, they'll grow it out, and they will just dry it, harvest it, dry it, grind it to a powder, and then sell it as a nutritional supplement. And they'll sell it and call it a mushroom. It's not a mushroom. This is actually something that was actually designed to be mushroom growing seed. So, and when you analyze it, what you find out is, of course, that it's mostly starch from the grain that comes with it. And the mycelium that is part of that, that's grown over it, is just a small percentage of it. I mean, the mycelial part of it is maybe 5 to 10%. So this is something that I'm always making people aware of, because when you go out in the marketplace, 70% of what's on the market, 70% of what's on the shelves in your Whole Foods or whatever store is this myceliated grain product. And you know what that really is? That's really what we would call tempeh. You know what tempeh is?
Fermented soy.
Yes, exactly. Do you know what ferments it?
Live cultures.
Of what?
Fungi.
Very good. Well, there's actually a fungus called Rhizopus, that's the genus, and they will take this fungus and they'll put it on cooked soybeans, and the fungus grows out over it. And so when you get a chunk of tempeh, you're like, okay, we got soybeans here, and there's this white stuff growing on there.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell is that? Well, it's mold. It's actually mycelium. That is the food product called tempeh. They're selling you ground up dried tempeh and calling it mushroom. And the problem is all of the grain that's in there, in the sense that you're not actually getting mushroom, you're getting mostly grain, and it's the most expensive grain you will ever buy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's wild. And I, of course, would be just concerned, I guess, with the companies and what kind of grains they're using, because for a lot of our clients, we recommend gluten-free because of the inflammatory processes of that protein.
Well,
So,
yes. And not only that, I mean, I go to shows every year that are called that are paleo shows.
mm-hmm.
And you know, people on paleo diets, a lot of them are like, we don't eat grains.
Right.
And when they tell me that they're taking some great mushroom product, and I have to tell them it's not a mushroom product, you have to be eating a lot of grains, they're kind of shocked. And as well they should be, because you know what it's like. I mean, these days people have so many different dietary restrictions, so everybody's looking very closely at what the label says and what they're consuming, and it's important, especially for people who are celiac. And so to have these products out there masquerading as mushroom, you're not getting the benefits, and B, you're getting mostly starch.
Mm-hmm.
So, and for me, I just think it's pretty unethical that that's going on.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry. Go ahead, Megan.
I was just gonna say they're basically ripping people off, which is terrible. So, Casey, what was your question? And then I want to get to, so how can people know if they're buying like a good quality supplement?
That was my exact question.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Here, I hate to say this, but this is the unfortunate thing: is, you know, we all want to be locavores, right? We all want to eat stuff that's close in. That's, you know, maybe if it's not made in the U.S., it's made local, and our food production is local and things like that. I certainly do.
Mm-hmm.
These products are made in the U.S. And the issue is that I can grow mushrooms. I was growing mushrooms commercially on a very big farm. That farm that I went to work on, we were growing 2 million pounds of the button mushroom every year. We also started growing shiitake, oyster mushroom, enoki take. So I'm really aware of what it costs to grow mushrooms. And you can grow mushrooms for food. You can put them into the marketplace, and you can get, just as an example, $5 a pound as a grower. But supplements are dry.
Mm-hmm.
Mushrooms, like most vegetables, are 90% water. You dry out that pound of mushrooms that you're getting $5 for, and now you have to get $50 for that same pound of mushrooms. Mm-hmm. So the economics do not work. And that's the reason why these products are being manufactured. So, number one, if it says made in the USA, you know absolutely it's this myceliated grain. And number two, look down in the other ingredients, look on the back, the supplements facts panel. Even though the front panel might say mushroom with a picture of a mushroom, turn it around, look at the supplements facts. If it says mycelium, okay, you got it. If it says in the other ingredients, if it talks about a grain in the other ingredients, you've definitely got it. Now, unfortunately, some companies who don't know any better will purchase these from the manufacturer and put it out. But the manufacturer of these products is actually telling these companies, oh yeah, we're selling you mushrooms. Mm-hmm. And these companies unwittingly will put out a mushroom product that is actually myceliated grain. So you know, it can be difficult. Let me give you a really quick, very cool test that I love, and it's called the iodine starch test. Iodine reacts with starch. Mushrooms have no starch. So if you empty out some capsules or some powder, like into a quarter cup of water, stir it up really good, let it get wet, let it sit 5 minutes, stir it up really good, put 10 drops of iodine in. Iodine starch test, it will turn it black. So if there is starch present, it will go black. If you have a real mushroom product, it will not turn color. All you'll see is basically the color of the iodine. Now, remember that some mushroom products will be dark to begin with, and so the test doesn't work quite so good for them, but some are light, and you can mix it in, and then you put your drops of iodine in, and you'll see it right away. The other thing to do is just take it out of the capsule and taste it. It will taste, in a lot of cases, kind of sweet. It's like, no, that's not a mushroom taste. Especially if you take and taste a reishi mushroom product. Reishi is bitter. You taste the reishi, it had better be bitter. If it's not, it is not reishi. So you go, oh yeah, reishi tastes really good. Boy, you do not have reishi. It's like really bitter. People are like, when they take some of our reishi extract, they're just like all of a sudden, oh my God, give me some water. This is really bitter.
Yeah. Now, that's super cool. I'm glad that you told us about that little trick because, mushroom and mushroom products are like the trend right now. Everybody's,
the mushroom coffees, especially. I mean, it seems like everyone is coming out with a mushroom coffee and everyone's drinking them.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? It's true. Mushrooms are trending right now. And it's kind of funny to me because, I started my company in 1989. There was nobody in the supplement industry that had a mushroom product. And I was out there trying to convince companies that had a complete line of herbal products that, look, have you ever heard of medicinal mushrooms? No. Did you know that they've been used for thousands of years in China? No. Oh, well, let me help you out here. So, and I'd have a reishi mushroom in my hand and they just look at it like, wow. And I'd say, here, look at this. And they look at it and go, what is this? A piece of wood? What is it? Because reishi is a hard, woody mushroom. It's beautiful, but it's hard and woody. And you're like, wow, what am I supposed to do with this? Well, I mean, you decoct it, you turned it into an extract or something. But that's kind of the way it was back then. Today, all of a sudden, I'm like, well, what took you guys so long to discover mushrooms? I've known this from the beginning. And look, I certainly, another thing too is I tell everybody to eat mushrooms. I think that's really important. But the other side of this, just remember that all of these, and we sell to companies that are putting out coffees. They're putting out mushroom chocolates. They're putting out a very innovative kind of products. But, at the same time, one of the most popular mushroom coffees out there, not from a U.S. company, but from a company that brings it in. It's a multi-level marketing company. It is, and it's called Reishi. It's a Reishi coffee of some sort. It's not Reishi, or if it is, it's what we call a fairy dusting. And all that means is they put a tiny amount in and then they call it Reishi coffee or something, when in fact there's not enough in there to just do anything. So that's the other side of it too, is you really have to be discerning and also look with a very kind of skeptical eye at marketing claims. This industry is, especially when you get on the internet now, it's like so full of wild and crazy marketing claims. And we do not make those kind of claims. I just refuse to do it. I'm not going to sell products like that. It's like today, I mean, mushrooms being what they are today, and you go out there and it's like chaga, the king of mushrooms. And there's nothing it won't cure. And it's a panacea. And I'm just like, no, it's like, I don't like that kind of talk at all. It's just what I call marketing speak. And I hope people are smart enough to look very closely at any of these products and do your homework, because it's not easy. It's really not easy, especially right now in the mushroom whole category. I mean, supplements in general, you have to be very careful with, and you just have to ultimately find out who's the good company, and you do that through friends and so on, even though they can be fooled too. I mean, the number of people that are fooled by some of these mushroom products who I'm just like, really? You didn't figure that one out? Did you ever taste this product? It's like, no, it's amazing. Sometimes too, it's like, well, you know what, that celebrity told me that it was really great, so I just decided I'd take it because I like them.
Yep,
because
exactly.
they're an actor or actress, or, it's like, so there's just, you have to be very skeptical with all of that, all information that you get. You just have to, be going, okay, yeah, I've got my bullshit detector on.
Exactly. Now, what are so there's so many different mushroom blends out there, and there's various different types of mushrooms in general. So we know we've got the reishi that we've been talking about, the chaga, the lion's mane, the shiitake, the turkey tail, and they all have different benefits, right? Like immune and inflammatory and all of these different things. So can you just touch a little bit about like what are the main active ingredients of medical mushrooms and what gives them our health benefits?
Sure. You know what? The most important compound in all of these medicinal mushrooms are what are called beta glucans. And there is a deep, deep reservoir of research that has been done on beta glucans. They are what give you the immunological benefits, and it's considered immunological modulation. So that means you're taking them, and if your immunity gets a little bit low, what happens is they will stimulate receptor sites that we have to produce macrophages and T cells and NK cells and the basic immune cells. And so that, for the most part, all of these major medicinal mushrooms will provide you with these immunological benefits due to the beta glucans. And now others will have certain other things that we can talk about right now. But first, let me just say, with the beta glucans, that is one of the things that my company has pioneered in terms of actually measuring the beta glucans. So all of what we sell, we give amounts of beta glucan that are in our products. And that's really important because what used to be a standard for measuring medicinal mushrooms was polysaccharides. Well, beta glucans are polysaccharides, but so is grain. Grain is also a polysaccharide. So any company that is still talking about polysaccharides, it's like polysaccharide analysis means nothing for medicinal mushrooms. Beta glucan analysis is really the key. So look for companies that are actually talking about and giving you a percentage of beta glucans. If they're talking polysaccharides, those grainy mycelium products, really high in polysaccharides. It's just not an indicator of quality at all. So the beta glucan is really the key. And the other thing that's happening here is you'll have mushrooms like, for example, lion's mane. You guys heard of lion's mane?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants lion's mane because everybody's going, what, you mean I could get some cognitive benefits?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go, lion's mane, I want some now. So that's our biggest selling product right now. And it's really an interesting mushroom because it has compounds in it that stimulate what's called nerve growth factor. And nerve growth factor is important and instrumental in the production of neurons, so brain cells basically, and nerve cells. So, and it's really interesting because, with most herbal products, you rarely ever see clinical trials. You see the odd clinical trial, but they're expensive. So not many companies are willing to pay what it takes, but there's some really good clinical trials that have come out of Japan using lion's mane. One of them, they had two groups, a control group of 30 people and a regular group of oldsters, like 70-year-olds kind of, hello. and they gave them a battery of tests before they started in on this. And then the one group ate 3 grams, just 3 dried grams of lion's mane per day for 90 days. The other group just took a placebo. At the end of 90 days, they tested them again. The group that took the lion's mane did really much better on the cognitive tests. And people doing these tests, they have different programs and sets of tests that they use to test you for different cognitive abilities and things like that. So that was really interesting that
Mm-hmm.
they actually scored higher. The other part of that study was when they stopped taking the lion's mane, they tested everybody again 30 days later, and the group that had tested well dropped back down to the norm.
That's really
Oh
interesting.
man. Yeah.
I
That's sad,
know, I
sad day. They
know.
went back to being dumb.
I know, I know. So I'm just there like, oh well, I guess you're gonna have to take lion's mane the rest of your life. Ha ha.
Yep. Yeah.
You know?
Now, what about dosing though? So you talked about 3 grams specifically, because that's the other issue is a lot of companies that are making these mushroom products. It's like, micrograms of X mushroom. So how would you navigate the waters with dosing and how to get the benefits from appropriate dosing and like how long to take everything?
Well, you know what? There's a MD friend of mine who he was raised in Hong Kong, knows traditional Chinese medicine really well, but came to the United States to go to med school and has lived here ever since. So he knows both. He did a very detailed study of reishi and what was the traditional amount of reishi mushroom that they would take in China for various illnesses, and he came up with something that I use for all mushrooms, and that is 2 to 5 dried grams of just the mushroom or equivalent amount of extract. So let's say if you were at the high end and said 5 grams of dried mushrooms, well, that would be the same as 1 gram of a 5-to-1 extract. I use that as just a basic kind of, this is what I would normally tell most people who are, especially customers that want to know how much to put out. But, the thing is that in China, when they're boiling up their herbs, they're normally giving people a fairly significant amount because they want to see something happen.
Yeah.
In North America, what we do and what most companies do is they put out a bottle with 60 capsules, and maybe it's each capsule is 500 milligrams, and they take 2 a day, and guess what? 2 a day, 60 capsules. Oh, that's a month's supply. How convenient. So that's kind of what they do, and unfortunately, in so many cases, that's just not enough. And again, depending on, like I would say, 1,000 milligrams of any one of these mushrooms, just the straight mushroom powder, would not be enough. You gotta take more. I mean, again, the 2 to 5 grams, I like that as a guideline. And again, if you've got an extract, you can take less, because the thing with an extract is, and again, when I talk about extracts, I'm talking about something that is going to concentrate all of the compounds and not try to build up one or another. But what you're doing is you're basically, when you extract, you're removing the fiber, and the fiber takes up a lot of space. So the idea behind an extract is you pull everything out, you have all the compounds there that you expect to get, but you don't have the fiber so that you can take less. That's really the key to an extract, and that's why, somebody doing in China, when they're boiling up all this pot of herbs, they'll pour off, you drink the tea, but you don't, they're leaving the fiber behind, right? So that is what I would say in general, is what I tell people. And I'd also say this is, look, depending on what you're looking for, because if you're looking for something that is kind of a daily, I want to stay a little bit healthier, you might be at that 2 gram basis of the kind of the dried mushroom equivalent, or whereas if you had something that was a little more, you're really got an illness that you just can't break, then you'd probably want to be up at the higher level. And I think at times that especially with herbal products, I think people are underdosing all the time. And I understand, because a lot of these herbal products are expensive, and supplements are not cheap. And that's why I oftentimes with mushrooms, I say, well, look, buy fresh mushrooms, put them into your diet, because you can get a good amount, like 100 grams of fresh mushrooms. That's 10 grams of dried. Well, 100 grams of fresh mushrooms. I mean, I weighed up a button mushroom the other day, and just a medium-sized button mushroom, it weighed 40 grams. It was a wet weight, 40 grams.
Wow.
I mean, 40 grams. So that means 2.5 of those, and you've got your 100 grams. 40 grams would give you 4 dried grams. Now, the difference is that when you eat something, and you guys probably know this, it's like, okay, we're not necessarily chewing it as well as if it's ground to a powder. So, when you have something dry, you grind it to a powder, it's just like, boom, you've got all of the nutrients there going right, for better, for worse. I mean, with some things it's good. For other things, you're like, no, too high glycemic index, and we don't want to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, that's one of the things about the powder, is that it should be a lot more bioavailable to most people. But the other side of that too is mushrooms have a lot of fiber. They're going to feed the microbiome too. And in that fiber is actually beta glucans. Interesting. Insoluble beta glucans. It's the soluble ones that are really the most effective immunologically, but those insoluble beta glucans feeding your microbiome, I think, still will provide some benefits.
Definitely. Good pre and probiotics there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's what I would say, generally speaking, for the amount that you want to consume. And you guys eat shiitake mushrooms at all?
No.
What?
I know.
You've got them right. You've got them right in your marketplace. I'm telling you. I don't have to come to your town and show you.
Yep. I was just about to say I got some oysters. Is that right? Oyster mushrooms?
Oyster mushrooms, yeah.
Yep. I got some from the farmer's market last weekend on Saturday. So
wow, way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I consider mushrooms to be kind of like the missing link in terms of foods. We've got plants, we've got animals. Mushrooms are their own kingdom, right in the center, and they're providing benefits that we're not going to get from the other two groups. And so I always tell people, put them into your diet, get them in there. They're a great food, provide you some benefits. And shiitake is the one that I got a fabulous flavor. It's really good. And you can do anything with them. That's the thing. You can do anything with them. And be sure you cook them on a high heat. Otherwise, you'll have your, youngsters, if you have any, that go, oh, Mom, it's so slimy. I don't like it.
Is that your favorite mushroom?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's my favorite mushroom. Yeah, and I buy it all the time. And I buy the button mushroom too, and I buy any other mushrooms that I can get my hands on. And we'll go out and hunt wild mushrooms too. We're just moving into the wild mushroom season. In fact, Andrea told me today that she just saw some chanterelles in the marketplace. So we have wild chanterelles that get right into our markets. So
very cool. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, now I've got a question for you. Since mushrooms are a fungi, I have been dealing with a lot of moldy clients in the last year. So I live in Houston. Of course, we went through Harvey. We had mold. It's been this long journey.
Oh my God, I cannot even imagine.
Yep.
I mean, not only the dampness, but the high temperature. Molds love
humidity.
High temperatures. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm screwed. I got to move out of Houston to get rid of it. But no, we're dealing with it. But we typically run a urine panel that specifically looks for mycotoxins from mold. And so I guess my question for you is just in terms of people incorporating mushrooms in their diet when they already have like a fungus or yeast overgrowth issue internally. Do you think that would be like incorporating mushrooms would be beneficial, or would it cause more of an issue with the mycotoxin factor?
Well, you know what, first of all, think about it for a second. It's kind of, I think of that as what's called sympathetic magic. Like produces like. Okay. And I've never seen any scientific evidence anywhere. And here's the real issue. The real issue is that molds, man, what's the problem with molds is the spores that they produce. And with molds, what happens is they get in, they start to grow, and they'll sporulate, and you'll see them oftentimes because all of a sudden a corner of the room is black or green, and those are spores, and it's the spores getting into the air which people breathe that are really what are causing those problems for people. So it's a respiratory issue. It has nothing to do with actually consuming. I mean, if you can consume a dangerous mold or something, you might get an upset stomach or something like that. That's certainly something that you don't want to do, and we can normally look at our food to tell that. The other thing with molds is what we would call mycotoxins. And mycotoxins are actually, there's a couple of molds that produce them, but most of the places you're going to get a mycotoxin is from moldy grain. And when this mold gets on moist grain, it will spread on the grain, and then it will actually manufacture these toxins. And those particular toxins, which are called aflatoxins, they are very dangerous. But again, that's something you're going to get more with grains, and you'll see that occasionally where there'll be a serious issue with mycotoxins, but it's normally these grain products that end up with these mycotoxins in them. So all the companies out there that are producing grains and have these big grain elevers, and they're testing. What are they testing for? They're actually testing, it's really interesting, they're testing for a fungal sterol called ergosterol. And if they detect high amounts of that sterol, well, that tells them they've got fungi in there that are present producing this toxin. So again, it's not from eating mushrooms that you're going to get these types of things. Eating mushrooms and eating other people, the other one is eating mushrooms will just feed candida. Really? No. It's again, it's kind of like produces like, and it's just one of those. I don't even know where it came from, actually. I think it was just because, like I say, I have never ever found a paper anyway. But a lot of naturopaths have got this idea, and I try to dispel that with the ones that I talk to and say, just show me where the scientific evidence shows this. But it's really just kind of a fallacy that eating mushrooms will somehow feed it's like a fungus is going to feed this yeast infection down there. No more than probably, the things that are really feeding that would be your sugars and things like that. Certainly not a fungus, a mushroom.
Oh yeah, I kind of figured that was the answer, but I wanted to ask.
Oh yeah, I love that people do ask that, because it still kind of floats around out there. It hasn't too much in the last 10 years. It seemed like a lot of people were talking about back in the 90s, and we really had to work hard to try and overcome it. Then it kind of drifted away. But you know how these things are kind of cyclical too, and everything comes back. It's like, whether it be haircuts or clothes or you name it, they all come back.
One way or another.
Yeah.
They do.
Now, what about mushrooms in terms of like reishi mushroom, how you were mentioning earlier, how they increase like natural killer cells. So in terms of using that as like a therapeutic modality for like Lyme disease and co-infections, have you heard about that kind of stuff or?
Well, you know what? I haven't heard much about it in terms of Lyme disease, or what was the other type of infection? Or are you saying co-infections?
Just co-infections, yeah.
I haven't heard it much for that. You know what? Here's the thing. The beta glucans provide this immunological, let's just call it a shield, and they work as antifungals, antibacterials. I mean, they're working in so many different ways. I mean, it's just interesting when you look at the depth of research and how the beta glucans just seem to be responsible for almost all of those benefits that come from mushroom products. So I would say, use it as a adjuvant. And so if somebody is sick with these things, they could be taking the mushroom as a secondary help for these major issues that they have. While we're talking about reishi too, there's some really interesting studies about reishi and altitude. And
goody.
So that's something that you really could consider is a reishi supplement to be taking as you prior and as you go on your trip. That's definitely something where I've seen research. And I'll see if I can dig it out for you too, because it's been a long time since I saw that initial paper. But I think there was also something as well that talked about cordyceps and altitude, and that may be another one that you might want to look at. In fact, I had somebody back in the 90s that used our reishi, and they went off mountain climbing somewhere, and they said it worked really well for them. So that's
awesome.
Definitely something that I would recommend that you try on your trip. My God, I can't even imagine climbing. I mean, even base camp is like, can you, no, that's too high for me.
Yeah, it's at 17,700 feet. So,
Oh my
yeah.
God. I mean, the highest I've been, I think, was in Cuzco down in Peru,
Okay.
and it's at 11,000 feet. And I could definitely feel it there. In fact, I got a little bit of altitude sickness while I was in the vicinity for a night or two, where I kind of got flu-like symptoms,
Hmm.
and but they subsided. But yeah, definitely it was, wow.
Now you said to,
11,000.
I'm sorry, say that again. I
That was
totally interrupted.
only at 11,000 feet, not
Mhm.
17.
Yep. Well, luckily I live in Colorado, so I've been able to get up to 14,000 feet
Oh,
pretty
wow.
frequently. But you
Yeah.
also mentioned to start taking the reishi maybe before we leave. How far in advance should
Oh,
we
well, you
start?
know what? I don't see why you couldn't be doing that at least 2 weeks in advance,
Okay.
and maybe a little bit more. But I think that would be the way to go, is just to start in with a regimen of that, and why not get started early? Because
Mhm.
the thing for me about medicinal mushrooms is that you don't really expect them to work immediately.
Mhm.
And I tell this to people, how so many people think they're going to take something, and they're so used to having, maybe they take an aspirin and the headache goes away in an hour, or an ibuprofen and see the muscle ache goes away. That's really not how mushrooms work. They're working in the background. You have to take them for a period of time before you really start to see benefits. So that's to me, that's where, for you, getting started a little bit early is probably
Mhm.
important. I mean, it's just, these do not work immediately. That's just not the way they work. Even though I will say, it's funny because I read a lot of reviews of our products and other products. And I say, oh, I was coming down with a cold yesterday. I took a couple of, started on the mushroom thing. Today I feel great. It's like, well, it's like, maybe you do, but it wasn't the mushrooms.
It could possibly be the mental aspect of it too.
Well,
People are just like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. I feel so
yeah,
good."
yeah, I know. I sometimes wonder about that, and lion's mane, right? It's like, wow, I woke up this morning and I felt like a genius.
Hmm.
Yeah, I want that. I want to feel like a genius.
Mhm. Now, what about so you mentioned cordyceps, because I've
Mhm.
heard that can be good for like muscle recovery and athletic performance.
Well, here's what's interesting about cordyceps is that cordyceps is just a fantastic fungus. Traditionally it's wildcrafted, and it's wildcrafted in Tibet, and that sort of high altitude, which is interesting in itself, right? So there it is, and what happens is it's a caterpillar will hibernate over the winter, and unbeknownst to the caterpillar, he has been infected with some spores of cordyceps. And so while he's hibernating, these spores germinate, they move right into his inside of him, and they consume him, top to bottom. They consume this caterpillar, and so he doesn't wake up in the summertime, spring and summer. What happens is when the temperatures change and climate changes, all of a sudden up pops this little cordyceps that's growing right out of this caterpillar, and the caterpillar is only like maybe an inch or two underground. And so up comes this little cordyceps. It's a little blade-like. They actually call it in China, they call it winter worm summer grass, because this little cordyceps kind of looks like a blade of grass. And so people in Tibet, they'll go out and they'll be on their hands and knees combing through the pastures looking for these cordyceps caterpillar fungus. And in today's market, that caterpillar fungus sells for $20,000 a kilogram.
Wow.
$20,000 a kilogram. Now, nobody can afford that, really. And I tried to introduce it into the market back in the early 90s, and I had people look at me like, my customers are not going to eat caterpillars. I'm sorry. I'm like, yeah, I understand. No problem. But today we're actually able to cultivate cordyceps, and that's really cool because it's very rare when a new mushroom comes into cultivation, and they've just learned how to grow it in the last 10 years. Not the same species, a different species, but a species that they've used interchangeably with this high altitude caterpillar fungus. So we have that now. And traditionally what they used cordyceps for was for people that were ill and they were overcoming, they kind of like they'd gotten over the illness, but they were still struggling to regain their complete health. They were still kind of tired, weak, fatigued. And so that's when they prescribed cordyceps to them. So in a sense, the idea of fatigue has translated a bit into the athletic sphere of, oh, well, anything that works to help me with fatigue or recovery, I'm going to try and use. And so that's where a lot of people have used the cordyceps, including in, I'm pretty sure, the high altitude applications. And you know how they measure herbal products for fatigue? They do what's called the mouse swimming test.
Please explain.
Yeah, I think we understand.
Mouse swimming test. You have a small pool or pond or something that, you know, is so round, and you feed this little guy cordyceps for a couple of weeks, and you feed a control, just a regular diet for a couple of weeks. You put each of them in this thing at different times, of course, and you let them swim, and you time it. And okay, this mouse without cordyceps swam for a minute before he started to go under, and we did save him. He's fine. The other one, however, swam for 2 minutes. So that's the mouse swimming test, and that's how you would test something for fatigue, for sort of breathing oxygen, that type of thing. So that's the mouse swimming test. Cordyceps and reishi have both done very well in the mouse swimming test. So, and here's the other thing that you have to remember too, and this gets back to what we were talking about earlier about some of the information that floats around out there. Back in the 1990s, in 1993, in the Asian National Games, Chinese athletes, runners, broke all sorts of world records. And it was just like, the world was like, oh my God. Like in the 10,000 meter, they broke the record. One woman broke the record by 50 seconds.
Whoa.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they went on to, some of these athletes went on to where they participated in the Olympics and broke a couple of records. If you can imagine, some of those records are still standing today, 20 years later. That's almost unheard of. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the coach of these women said, we're feeding our athletes cordyceps, a special blend of cordyceps and turtle blood. Well, the next thing you know, all over everywhere, magazine articles and everything else, it was like cordyceps. This was the reason they broke all these records. So it kind of got identified with athletic performance. But here's the kicker. Back in those early days, they didn't have tests for EPO, which is like a human growth hormone, and one of those compounds that was difficult for them to detect. This was what Lance Armstrong was using. Mm-hmm. By the end of the 90s, they could test for those, and the coach and his athletes got busted. And so basically, the whole thing about cordyceps was kind of like, you know, he actually had a business selling a product too. So it was not real, essentially. So if you ever hear that story come up, just go, oh yeah, I've heard that story before. It's not true. Not true at all. But I still see it out there. Companies sometimes will bring that story up, and I just kind of have to laugh a little bit that story is still floating around by companies trying to sell cordyceps. But that's another part of those things that where if they're selling an athletic performance product and it happens to be cordyceps, they will no doubt use that about breaking Olympic records with cordyceps and things like that. And you think, oh yeah, well, I've always wanted to be an Olympic athlete. Try some of that cordyceps.
Yeah. Cordyceps / EPO.
Yeah, that's right.
Cordyceps infused with EPO, right?
That's right. That's right. Exactly. So, but you know, cordyceps is really an interesting fungus, and I think it's also got some real benefits in terms of immunological activities and all the others. It's one of our, what we would call, I mean, I would call it one of the major medicinal mushrooms. There's maybe 10 or 12 what I would call the major medicinal mushrooms. I mean, I've got a book from China called The Icons of Medicinal Mushrooms. And in this book, it's got 272 different mushroom species that they say have medicinal benefits. And some of the species maybe have only one scientific paper written on them, but it has shown some activity. So that's why it's in there. So it's like, okay, where do we start with this? 270, really? Well, I look at traditional Chinese medicine. What are you guys using? What are you still using? And then I look at the science. How much science since the 80s or so has been built up around these different mushrooms that demonstrate, so that then I can say, okay, we've got traditional use, we've got scientific data, maybe if we're lucky, we've got some clinical trials. I mean, okay, yeah, this mushroom looks like it's a very beneficial medicinal mushroom.
Now, earlier, one thing that I wanted to just circle back on is earlier you mentioned how the products that are typically mostly starch, on the label, they will specifically say, grown in the USA, which is oddly enough what we typically look for, right? And in the 1990s, I know that you traveled back and forth to China, learned a lot, started really getting into the farming and stuff. So can you just talk more about like the sourcing of your mushrooms and where you guys grow things, and just touch on, of course, like we think of China and we're like, oh, it's not organic. Like I'm very eerie about purchasing anything from there, but you've built a really successful business working with China and farmers over there and stuff. So can you touch a little bit upon that?
Oh yeah, in 1989, I took my first trip to China to an international conference on medicinal mushrooms, on mushrooms generally, and I met a lot of people there from China, and I also, during the rest of the 90s, I traveled there extensively, and I was visiting research institutes, I was visiting farms, processors, going to many, many different conferences. And again, as a commercial mushroom grower, and all of a sudden going in and starting a business selling medicinal mushrooms, I realized right away, look, I cannot grow mushrooms cheaply enough in North America and actually put them into the medicinal mushroom market. It just could not be done. So I worked with a number of growers and processors, and in 1997, I took OCIA, which is one of the largest organic certification organizations in the United States. I took them with me to China, and I organized the very first organic mushroom workshop in China, and we had 24 growers there. And because I totally believe in certified organic products, and look, the thing I think you have to realize is that it's not just China. United States pours so many chemicals on all of its agricultural crops, and that's something we all are trying to deal with, the fact that we are consuming chemicals that we didn't ask for. Mm-hmm. Our food system is based on chemical agriculture. So for me, it's an ethic that I totally subscribe to, and my company's actually been certified since 1992. But I was like, look, if I'm going to be bringing in these mushrooms from China, I have to know that they are not laden with chemicals and pesticides and all the rest, because yeah, there's definitely some polluted areas there, but I mean, you live in Texas, think about what the Gulf Coast is like, all that petrochemical down there. Would you eat anything that is grown in that area? I wouldn't either.
Definitely not.
So it's really more a matter of, okay, where is it grown? We grow almost all of our mushrooms back in the mountains, far away from industrial pollution. Mm-hmm. Before anything that we grow leaves China, we test it for a complete panel of pesticides. We test it for heavy metals. We do the microbiological testing on it. It ships. When it arrives at our warehouse in the United States, we test it again over here with different labs for pesticides, heavy metals, microbiological. So we test everything twice. If it shows, I mean, and we cannot sell the product if it's got heavy metals that are too high, or the micros are out, or even if we've got pesticides in it, we just can't sell it. So in that sense, that's one of the interesting things. It's like, in that sense, most supplements have a lot of serious regulations on them in terms of quality control. And that's what's kind of interesting, because I can tell you, look, this is how we deal with all that. Somebody in the United States selling this myceliated grain product, they can say, our product is manufactured in the United States. We've got a clean facility. It's organically certified. It's kosher. It's non-GMO, on and on and on, and still sell you grain powder. Mm-hmm. And you think you're getting a mushroom. And that's what's really unfortunate. We basically will demonstrate that we have analyzed this, and we can absolutely guarantee to you that it is a mushroom, that it's got all of these compounds that are supposed to be there. So the profile is that of a mushroom. And what I did is I did a study about 4 years ago where we tested all of those particular products. And what's really interesting is that if you do just nothing more than a nutritional profile, protein, carbohydrate, fats, minerals, and you chart it, and then you do the same on those products, they line up perfectly with the grain. Protein is the same, carbohydrates the same, fats are the same. It lines up perfectly with the grain. And so there are lots of tests that can be done to demonstrate this, but they can say, but we're organically certified. We've got a great product grown in the United States. It's like, yeah, that's fine. Just sell it for what it is. It's tempeh. It's not mushroom.
Yeah.
But anyway, I totally understand why people are like China. I mean, there's lots of polluted areas in China, and remember, we have lots of polluted areas too. And what we did is we shipped all of our polluting companies over to China and set them up over there. And right now, there's all this China bashing going on. I'm like, why is this, China bashing? It was American companies that went there to set up their production because there was cheap labor and ship it back to people to give them low prices. And you're blaming China for that? It's like, come on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the education piece about what's going on is the important part.
Yeah, no, that's right. And so again, I'm very concerned about the products I sell, and I want to make sure that they're high quality products. And I think our products are the highest quality out there on the market. And the thing about it is some companies, they don't know anything at all about mushrooms, and yet they're selling mushroom products, and you're just like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Now you're a distributor company, right? So you specifically supply the mushrooms to other companies so that they can make the mushroom products, correct?
Well, we have two different divisions. The Nammex, our main company, sells raw materials, or basically bulk powders, to other companies that will put them in capsules, bottles, put their label on them, and put them in the marketplace. And then we also have a retail side that mostly gets sold on the internet through a website and or on Amazon, and that's where we'll sell the products retail. And pretty much the reason we put out the retail products was because a lot of times when companies buy our mushroom products, what they'll do is they will formulate with them, or they'll add a little bit here, a little bit there. We wanted to make sure that people could get the products in a totally unblended way to be able to get the full benefits of just the mushrooms. And so that's where our retail line really fits into it all.
And that's realmushrooms.com?
Yes, real mushrooms.
Okay. I'm scoping it out right now because I'm like, ooh, I need to order some stuff. So
got to get on that Reishi.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's realmushrooms.com. And that's, and the other thing too is that on my website, whether it's nammex.com or realmushrooms.com, we have a ton of good information. I've got some great slideshows on nammex.com that take you to our farms and give you farm tours and talk about how things are grown and just a deep amount of information about medicinal mushrooms and the benefits and so on. And just remember this is that, one of the things that certainly as somebody in the herbal industry, it is so difficult to talk about benefits because we have FDA hanging over us and we can only go so far in talking about it. So normally I like to talk about it in terms of, the fact of the important compounds and what they do and so on. And I would never say anything like that. Oh yeah, they're going to cure this or they're going to cure that. That's not what we do. And I totally believe in that too, because I think, there's unfortunately too many people making wild claims out there that are just absolutely unsupported.
No, but you've made a really good point just in terms of like the beta glucans in there and how they can improve like overall immune health. And I think that's just a really big piece of the importance of getting in your daily dose of mushrooms.
Yeah, no, it's true. That's what all the scientists have told us is the key compound in the mushrooms. And what's interesting is that makes up 50% of the cell wall of the mushroom. It's really cool. And it's the mushrooms also have a compound in it called chitin, which is something that binds a lot of these things and makes it a little less digestible. And that's why mushrooms have a lot of fiber. But the beta glucan, when we do most of our products, will do like for example, a one-time extraction, which is kind of a processing of them, and then they become a really nice fine powder, and that helps to make them a little more bioavailable, more digestible, so to speak. And I think that's important.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Now, as someone who is about to start implementing mushrooms into my diet, how do I know if one is working with me or maybe my body isn't quite agreeing with it?
Well, you know what? The first thing I tell anybody when they're going to eat mushrooms, or I would say, really any new food, start out with a small amount first, just to make sure that your body, with most foods and even with some mushrooms, I mean, there's maybe 5 or 10% of the people that are just allergic to mushrooms. And so that's something that you really want to do. It's like, you never want to I'm going to sit down to a nice big meal of mushrooms that I've never eaten before. Definitely not. In fact,
thank you for that reminder, because that would be me.
well, there are, in terms of people who hunt wild mushrooms, there are poisonous mushrooms, of course. And some of the mushroom poisonings that happen where people actually die are where it's oftentimes immigrants that come in. They've hunted them with their family back in the old country, and they come over here, they see something that looks like it, they gather a bunch of them, they take them home, they will fry up a ton of them and they'll eat a lot of them. That's just a terrible thing to do. And that's why they end up oftentimes dying from it, because, in the case of the really poisonous mushrooms, you don't even know you're poisoned until 8 hours later. And then it's really too late. But all of the mushrooms that you're going to be buying in the marketplace, none of them are poisonous. They're all good to eat. But definitely start out with, not a whole lot, just a bit, just to see how you like. Well, for one, like the flavor, and then see how it agrees with you or not. And then you can kind of add more as you go along. That's just the best way to do it.
Okay. Good to know. Yeah, because I would totally be that person that sits down and eats 4 pounds of them. Yes.
And let me tell you, I can sit down and do a half a pound of fresh mushrooms just without blinking an eye, because I can just, the other thing about mushrooms is when you start to fry them, it's like, wow, where'd they go? They will actually kind of shrink up in the pan. But be sure when you're cooking them, use a hot pan, your whatever oil that you use in your diet, but a hot pan. I like to brown them up a little bit. So don't slice them too thin, slice them about maybe 1/4 of an inch. So you've got a nice piece, throw them in the oil, hot pan, let them brown up on both sides. And then I cook them a little longer than most people would. But, the thing about it is, if you cook them in a pan that's not hot enough, all the water in them will come right out. Now you're looking at these mushroom slices that are sitting in a pool of water.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you wonder why kids will go, oh, it's so slimy. Yeah, they are. They're waterlogged.
Yeah.
I've totally done that. It's gross.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No. Really, when mine come out, there's no water anyway. They're just, the water is sort of seared. It's the moisture's inside the mushroom, so they're still nice and the texture's good, the flavor's good. Yeah.
Mm.
All right. So hot pan
Grass-fed butter.
before we put
Grass-fed
them
butter,
in.
yeah. Yeah, I was just reading about you guys. Are you guys familiar at all with Andrew Weil?
I've heard of his name, but I'm not like super familiar.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting because he's written a lot on diet. He and was one of the first that really got into all of that. And I was just reading. I go back to him a lot just to read about certain things. And this was like a book that he published back in the early, like 2001, 2002. Here he is talking about the difference between animals that are grass-fed and those that aren't. And it's like, yeah, Andy, you were definitely ahead of your time.
Yeah, it's important.
Oh, it is. It absolutely is. It's just like grass-fed beef or any of that. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, you're just going to feed grains to these things, and we're expecting that to be the same as before. No,
Right.
not at all.
No.
Like a mushroom growing on grain versus on a tree.
Yeah, well, see, and that's what's really interesting because most of these medicinal mushrooms grow on wood, and remember too, what's grown on that grain is you never grow mushrooms on grain, and not only that, you're not even growing mushrooms on grain because all they're doing is growing mycelium and then harvesting it before a mushroom even grows. But no, you'd never grow mushrooms on grain. That's not their standard substrate. The wood has compounds in it that are important to be able to produce the medicinal compounds that are in the medicinal mushrooms. So like if you look at chaga, that birch tree has got compounds that it pulls out into the chaga. The reishi mushroom, because of the wood it grows, produces compounds called triterpenoids because of the wood that it's growing in. If you don't have the right substrate to produce these mushrooms, you're not going to get the compounds that you should be getting.
Well, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Who knew mushrooms were so complicated?
I know.
I had no idea.
I've learned so much today.
I know, right?
And we've just scratched the surface, believe me.
Oh, I can only imagine.
Well, I'm going to send you guys some info too that you can have, and I don't know if you ever put up stuff with your podcast, but you can spread the info around. I got some great research papers that talk about them, some nice review papers that give you an overview, including I've got some really good papers on nutritional benefits that will be important too. So nutritional and medicinal. And you know what? The way you started it out today was the way I look at it, which is food as medicine. What an important concept. Everything that we're eating should be nourishing us in multiple ways. And the diet is just the foundation of our health.
Exactly. And that is one thing that Casey and I preach all day, every day. So, well, Jeff, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Project Nourish podcast today. Where can listeners find you if they want to learn more about Nammex or just more about you in general?
Well, if they come to nammex.com, Nammex.com, I've got some stuff there about myself, small amount, but then a lot of really good info. And then if they go to Real Mushrooms, all one word, realmushrooms.com, that's where we've got a lot of information too, and that's where the retail products are that they're interested in that. So those two websites, lots of really good information.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And then anything else you can send us, we'll put it in the show notes. So we'll tag it up for our listeners.
Awesome. Well, I'm also going to send you a coupon so you guys will be able to order some products for free.
Woo! Casey will love that. I will too. All right, Jeff. Well, thank you so much. It's been super fun.
Absolutely. Thanks, Casey. Thanks, Megan.